All right, welcome back. So the topic of this video, old ties and companions. Um, I promise this video will be shorter than the last one because that one went on for quite a while. So one thing to talk about as we begin talking about humans, how humans human, as broad and odd as that topic is, one thing to talk about there is nature and nurture, something that I would imagine has come up in classes before, at least if you've taken a psychology class before. Um, and so basically, it's this question of whether nature or nurture is more influential on human beings, our behavior, mental processes, or overall psychology. And so, to lean into both sides of the argument, or each side of the argument rather, on the nature side, this would argue that it's ultimately our nature that determines how we are as people, right? So, this would be like our inherited genetics that we're born with, our hormones, our physiology, just our underlying biology and nature that might be unique to any given person based off what we're born with, essentially. On the nurture side, then, it would say just the opposite. It would say that that doesn't matter at all. Rather, it's entirely our social environment, our communities, our peers, our caregivers, our family, things like that, right? So nature is what we're born with. Nurture is the nurture or our experiences in the environments in which we go about our lives from the time we're born to ultimately the time we die. And so today I kind of wanted to dive into this a little bit more and then focus more on the nurture side, hence the title, Old Ties and Companions. Um, One thing I like to do when we talk about nature and nurture is highlight one quick example here that, I don't know, tends to usually get people's interest. Um, some of you might have heard of this guy, some of you might not have. This person, Alex Honnold, is a free solo climber, which means that he climbs mountains, basically, like climbs big walls, without a rope or harness. So it's just him and the wall, and if he were to slip off, he would ultimately fall. And he's been doing this for a long time. And some people have raised this question of like, how is he able to do this? Is it something about his brain? Is he just fundamentally different than everyone else? Um, and what we would do in class is watch a clip from this documentary called Free Solo, which is about him and his attempt to free solo this one particular big wall climb. I'm not going to show it here because it would get really wonky in recording. We'll be in Canvas though on the Nature and Nurture page, so I encourage you to check it out. And as you do, I encourage you to think about ultimately what might be driving this. Is it nature? Is it nurture? In the clip, he gets a brain scan actually because they're trying to understand if his brain does work differently than people's. And the ultimate verdict, I guess to spoil that, is that it does. And I guess I'm spoiling all this right now. So if you want to watch that, I'll encourage you to pause this video here and then go watch that before you come back to this. Because ultimately there's kind of two questions here on both sides of this like debate, so to speak. Um, they see in the video that in the brain scan that his brain does work differently. His amygdala responds differently to fearful stimuli than most people's. And so it begs the question, is this because of something in his nature or something in his nurture? And to dive deeper into that, what would each of those sides mean? If it is something about his nature, what exactly does that mean, or what might be the implications there? And then same thing on the nurture side. Um, he himself, this came out after the documentary, he has talked about this. This is a direct quote from a story that I found. Um, and you're welcome to read through it, but basically like his argument is that it's ultimately a product of nurture. Like this last piece here, I spent 25 years conditioning myself to work in extreme conditions, so of course my brain is different, just as the brain of a monk who has spent years meditating or a taxi driver who has memorized all the streets of the city would be different. And there's to speak to that last part, I don't know if he's kind of just speaking from the heart, like if he's actually looked into this. There has been research on both of those things actually. Meditation certainly can change the brain. We'll kind of talk about that throughout the course. I think next week when we talk about consciousness in the brain. And same thing with taxi drivers. Like they've done studies on people who drive taxis or cabs in big cities, and you can actually see differences in their brains in the hippocampus. It's a particular part of the brain that is ultimately involved. It's involved in a lot of things. It's crucial for forming memories, and anything spatial, like spatial memories, like if you um, I don't know, if you go hunt or fish or you know a trail system really well and you start to get to know an area, like kind of like the back of your hand, as the saying goes, you can actually see differences in the brain associated with that. And so the kind of verdict here, like most things in psychology, is that it's not one or the other, it's a combination of both, right? Nature influences nurture and nurture influences nature. So in other words, what we're born with is going to influence us and what we experience throughout our lifetime. But our nurture, our environments, the people we are around, our communities, our organizations, so on and so forth, these things absolutely influence us too and can influence our nature. And although we're born with certain genes, the way those genes express themselves can actually change depending on our experiences. There's this field called epigenetics that kind of gets into that. For just one example of this complex interaction, we'll talk about health towards the latter part of the semester. But to kind of give a preview of some of that, there's been research on what influences your health. I think like I don't know. I don't want to say this is true everywhere, but I've certainly, in my experience, interacted with people who have very different views on people's decisions when it comes to health. Like if people make healthy choices or unhealthy choices, what's behind that? I think oftentimes I've seen some people tend to blame the person, others tend to blame the system, and it's kind of a combination of both. And so, more information about where these numbers come from is here on the right. But based off what people have, I guess backing up, this is an impossible thing to quantify, but to the best of people's abilities, this is how they've kind of quantified what influences people's health. So about 40% is related to socioeconomic factors, like your education level, your job and employment status, family and social support, your income, your community and community safety. Basically things that have to do with the socioeconomic environment into which you're born and in which you um, are in throughout your life. I was going to say stay or leave, but maybe that's, I don't know, uh, too reductionist way to put it. About 10% is the physical environment, right? So what we're exposed to and how that ultimately influences our health, because there can be really drastic differences depending on, um, yeah, just physically what we're exposed to. Like if we're born in an area that's um, full of natural landscapes, fresh air, as opposed to, I don't know, if we're born in some industrial city next to a factory that's spewing out a bunch of pollution and things like that. About 30% people say is due or influenced by health behaviors. So the choices we make, our diet, so what nutritions or what nutrients we're intaking, what food we eat, our choices when it comes to exercise, substance use like tobacco use, alcohol use, and our sexual activity. And then roughly 20% is related to healthcare, both in terms of access to care, because that's something that can differ very greatly depending on one's circumstance, where one lives, what one's born into, what care is simply available in one's community, and then also the quality of care. So beyond simply access to it, the quality of the care that we have access to. And so as this depicts, right, it's not one or the other, it's kind of some messy combination of nature and nurture. Um, and so one thing I wanted to give a call back to here, the indigenous ecological systems model, something we've referenced throughout the course. If we were meeting in person, we would spend time in class kind of going through all these and kind of brainstorming and thinking about our own experiences and some examples of our individual culture and history, our immediate environments, our more distant environments. Um, for the sake of keeping this video brief, because I owe you that after the last one, we're not going to go through all that here. Um, so I guess you're welcome or I'm sorry, whichever one is more satisfying to you. Maybe that's good news, maybe it's not. Um, but I'll post some slides that kind of give some example ideas I put together of different influences from all these aspects of these ecological systems. Um, from historical and cultural to immediate and more distal environments. But it's something I encourage you to think about in your own life. What are these factors and how they might influence you? Or in other words, thinking more about the nurture piece rather than just the nature piece. And so I guess the note to end on there is that there are a lot of influences on human beings. This one focused more on the environment. So our experiences over our life, our social and cultural environment, spiritual environment, historical ancestral environment, physical environment. Things we'll come back to. We'll spend some time later this semester talking more about the social environment, more about community. Um, yeah, we've kind of touched on cultural environment, some other environments already. But something to keep in mind as we go through this course, and remember that it's not just the person, it's this combination, this influence or interaction of people and our environments. And with that, we'll see you next time.